Hello, and welcome back to Stories of Her Strength today. I'm sharing the voice of Margaret Elwood, a woman who gave everything to her family only to be pushed aside when they thought she had nothing left to offer. But what they didn't know was that Margaret still held the pen, and this is how she rewrote the ending. Before we begin, tell us where you're tuning in from in the comments. We'd love to know your country and if stories of strength, justice, and late life empowerment resonate with you. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell icon because we release new stories every week that remind the world just because she's quiet doesn't mean she's done now. Here's Margaret's story. I always thought betrayal would come in the form of a letter, or perhaps silence, the slow erosion of love over time. But mine came fast, sudden like the snap of a bone or the crack of thunder just before the storm. It was a Thursday. Remember that because the cleaning lady had just left, and the scent of lemon polish still lingered on the banister. Rain had been falling since dawn, soft at first, then heavier, as if the skies themselves were growing impatient. I had come downstairs to remind them about the soup on the stove. My grandson Lucas was in the foyer, backpack slung over one shoulder, scrolling through his phone. He barely looked up when I called his name. "Lucas," I said again, a little louder. "You forgot your umbrella." He turned to me, not the boy I used to carry on my hip, or the teenager who once cried in my lap when he got cut from the basketball team. No, that day I saw something colder in his face, his lips curled with irritation. "Why are you always in the way?" he snapped. It wasn't just the words. It was the tone, sharp, dismissive, like I was an obstacle, not a person. I reached for the railing to steady myself. I didn't see his foot move. I didn't even process it in time. All I knew was that my balance shifted. The hardwood beneath me vanished. And then air. A second of weightlessness, then wood. Hard, cracking, cold. I lay at the bottom of the stairs, stunned. My hips screamed. My ribs ached. But what hurt more than the fall was the sound of his footsteps walking right past me. No gasp, no "Grandma, are you okay?" Just the front door opening and closing. It took all my strength to crawl toward the living room, where I pulled myself onto the couch and waited. Waited for someone to check. Waited for my son, Daniel, to come home. Waited for the ache to become bearable. He came home 2 hours later. I heard the garage door, the murmur of voices between him and his wife, Rachel. Then footsteps. When he saw me on the couch, bruised and holding my side, his eyes widened, but not with concern. With discomfort? "What happened?" he asked, but didn't sit. I fell. I whispered. My voice was still shaky. On the stairs, Rachel appeared behind him, arms crossed. "She probably slipped," she said before I could answer. "You know those stairs get slick when it rains." I waited for Daniel to question her, to turn to me, but he just nodded. "Be more careful, Mom. Be more careful." I had raised him better than that. I thought I had. No one called an ambulance. No one offered to help me up the stairs. That night, I slept on the couch, clutching a pillow like it was the only thing left tethering me to the world I thought I knew. The next morning, I checked the mirror. My cheek was swollen, and there was a deep bruise blooming across my hip. I moved slower, quieter. Even the kettle seemed to hiss at me differently. Lucas didn't mention it. Neither did Daniel. The silence was worse than the fall. It told me everything I needed to know. Later that afternoon, while they were out, I went to my old bedroom, the one they had converted into a storage space after moving me into the smaller guest room at the back. I opened the closet and found an old photo album. Inside was a picture of Lucas at age 5, sitting on my lap with cake on his nose and joy in his eyes. I held that photograph for a long time. My fingers trembled, not from age, but from realization. This boy, this child I had adored, raised, sung lullabies to, had looked me in the eye and pushed me aside, literally, figuratively, and nobody cared. The house I had helped build with, my late husband, the home I once filled with warmth, garden tomatoes, and Sunday night meatloaf had become a place where I was tolerated at best, an accessory to their convenience. The bruise on my hip would heal, the one on my heart. That was different. I spent the rest of that day staring out the window as the rain softened into a mist. I didn't cry, I just stared, because something had changed. Not just in my body, but in the way I would be remembered. And I decided, right then and there, that if I didn't do something, if I didn't reclaim the name I once carried with pride, I would disappear, not die, not yet, but vanish in their minds, forgotten in their legacy. I wasn't ready for that, not yet, and certainly not like this. I used to believe that love, real, enduring love, left a visible mark. It's a chair worn down by years of the same embrace. It's a hallway filled with handprints. Laughter echoing from birthdays past. I thought those things would protect me, that they'd anchor me. But love, I learned, can be painted over, replaced, rearranged, forgotten. It began slowly. Almost politely, Rachel said she was thinking of making me more comfortable, that the master bedroom, my bedroom, was too far from the kitchen, and that I might appreciate the smaller guest room tucked behind the laundry closet, near the back door. The hallway light flickered out there, and the room always smelled faintly of detergent, but I smiled and nodded. I always nodded in those days. When I returned from a short walk that afternoon, my bed was gone. My nightstand, the one with my husband's handwriting, carved into the drawer, replaced with a flat-pack table from a box. My wedding photo, missing from the dresser. No one asked me. They just moved me. It's only temporary, Rachel said as she fluffed the new pillows. We'll find a better solution soon. I wasn't sure what better meant. I knew it didn't include me. The silence began to swell after that. At dinner, I'd enter the kitchen and the room would. Quiet. My footsteps felt too loud, my presence too large. I used to be the one who lit the candles, who placed the napkins with embroidered corners. Now my plate would appear at the end of the table, separate, like a serving dish no one wanted to touch. Daniel would kiss Rachel on the cheek as he left for work. Sometimes he'd forget I was sitting 10 feet away. Lucas, once the boy who used to crawl into my lap with sticky fingers and wide eyes, now passed me in the hallway without so much as a nod. One evening I reached for my favorite armchair, the one with faded blue fabric and a blanket I'd crocheted years ago, and found it gone. In its place was a leather recliner, new, shiny, expensive, looking but cold. When I asked about it, Rachel shrugged. Oh, that old thing. It didn't match the decor anymore. I didn't say anything. Not then. But something inside me began to curl inwards. I started spending my afternoons in the garden, though no one kept it anymore. The roses had grown wild, and weeds peeked through the cracks in the stones. I liked it that way. Unruly honest. One afternoon, as I reached for a stubborn root near the hedge, I heard whispers from the open kitchen window. She is slowing down, Rachel said. A pause. She won't be here much longer. Another voice, Daniel's, tired and low. We need to be patient. Once we have access to the savings. My breath caught. The savings, they weren't talking about their retirement. They meant mine. The money my husband and I had built. Dollar by careful dollar. We never lived lavishly, but we planned. We saved. We hoped. That night, I climbed the stairs. Slowly, every joint in my body aching, but not from the climb. From the weight of understanding in the guest room, my prison in floral wallpaper, I reached for the old wooden ledger tucked inside my suitcase. I'd kept it all these years. No spreadsheets, no apps. Just neat, careful entries in my husband's blocky handwriting and mine in cursive beside it. 1975, first deposit. $250.1982, paid Daniel's high school tuition. 1990 setup. Education fund for Lucas, 1998. Purchased family home in Margaret's name. My name, not theirs, mine. I ran my fingers down the page. Our sacrifices were there in ink. The nights we skipped vacations. The years we lived without new furniture. The way we worked so our family could live better. And now, I was reduced to a silent line item in their minds, an inconvenience, a roadblock. I didn't cry. Tears would have implied surprise. But this was no longer shocking. It was strategy. I began waking up earlier, watching, listening. Rachel would leave her laptop open on the kitchen counter. Documents half-read. I saw spreadsheets, plans, college payment timelines for Lucas. They assumed the money would be there. They had no idea how wrong they were. One afternoon, Rachel told me they'd be gone for the weekend, a short trip to the coast. I nodded politely. The moment they pulled out of the driveway, I opened the drawer in the foyer. My name was still on the house deed, tucked neatly inside a manila folder. They had never transferred ownership. Too busy, too entitled. Too certain. I wouldn't dare. I stared at my reflection in the hallway mirror. My gray hair was pinned back. Wrinkles lined my face. But my eyes were sharper than ever. Let them believe. I was fading. Let them believe I was done because they had forgotten. The most dangerous truth of all. I remembered everything, and I had just begun to move in silence. 80 years old. It's strange how a number can carry so much weight and yet feel so light in the hands of others. I had imagined that day so many times, not for fanfare or gifts, no, just for a moment. I shared smile, card perhaps, with the shaky scrawl of my granddaughter's handwriting. But when I opened my eyes that morning, there was nothing. No knock at the door, no footsteps outside my room. Just the faint sound of birdsong and the clinking of silverware downstairs. I waited a little while, told myself maybe they were planning a surprise. Maybe the quiet was part of something thoughtful, something kind. I took my time getting dressed. I even wore the brooch Daniel had given me when he was 10, a lopsided silver leaf he bought with chore money. I pinned it just above my heart, around. Midday, I heard laughter drift in through the open windows. Laughter and the soft hiss of a barbecue. I followed the sound through the hallway, my slippers silent against the hardwood. Until I reached the back door. I paused there, hand on the frame. Colorful balloons were tied to patio chairs. A folding table was covered in a blue checkered cloth. Someone had lit the small fire pit, and it crackled happily as smoke curled into the summer air. Daniel held a pair of tongs, flipping burgers. Rachel arranged a tray of deviled eggs. Lucas was on his phone, grinning at something on the screen. There were neighbors. Two, the ones from across the street, and a woman I didn't recognize, holding a glass of white wine. Hopeful. Maybe they'd included everyone. Maybe this was the surprise. I stepped outside. The sun hit my face, warm and uninviting. Rachel looked up first. Her expression froze, not with joy, but discomfort. Daniel turned, blinked, and forced a smile. Lucas, however, didn't bother pretending. He glanced at me, his voice flat. Didn't you hear? You weren't invited. The words landed like stones. He added, This is for people who matter. I stood there, barefoot on the brick porch. The brooch on my chest suddenly felt heavy, like an anchor pulling me down. The world around me kept spinning. The laughter, the clinking glasses, the smell of grilled meat. But I stood still. No one told him to apologize. No one rushed to correct him. Daniel turned back to the grill. Rachel went inside. Lucas scrolled on, so I turned around, walked back inside quietly. Slowly, each step echoing louder than any accusation I could have shouted. That night I didn't eat dinner. I sat in the dark of my small room, watching the shadows shift across the walls. No candles. No cake. Only the company of silence and the aching beat of something breaking open inside me. I reached for the drawer beside my bed. Inside, beneath an old photograph of my wedding day, was the deed to the house my husband and I had purchased. It together, and though the world had changed around us, that paper still bore my name. I ran my fingers along the edges, remembering his voice. Never let them forget who made them. He said it after Lucas was born, after we'd transferred part of our savings into a trust fund. He believed in legacy. in giving more than we ever received. But now, here I was, 80 years old, uninvited, unimportant, unseen, and something shifted in me that night. It wasn't sadness. I'd walked through too much of that already. It was something steadier, something colder, something useful. I no longer hoped they'd remember me fondly. Now I wanted them to remember me clearly. They had mistaken my stillness for surrender. But I hadn't been sitting in silence. I had been watching, and now I would begin to move, not with noise or rage, but with precision, like a hand turning a key, like a curtain being drawn. This story was not over it. It was just taking shape. I waited. Until they left for the weekend, Rachel had mentioned it in passing some charity gala by the coast. They'd be gone 2 nights, 3 if the weather was nice. Lucas, of course, didn't bother saying goodbye. His only contribution was slamming the front door behind him, the car engine roaring like a teenage tantrum in motion. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was mine. I stood in the hallway for a while after they left, one hand on the wall, steadying myself as if I were about to step into deep water. And in many ways, I was. I didn't pack much, just my handbag, the canvas. One I kept in the closet with my church clothes. Inside, I placed my identification, my marriage certificate, a faded photograph of my husband smiling beside his first truck, and the small leather ledger I'd protected for nearly 5 decades. It was time to remember what they had forgotten, and time to remind them what I never did. The bank was quiet for a Saturday morning. The floors were polished, the chairs too modern, the music almost apologetic in its softness. A young woman with coppery hair sat behind the desk near the vault. She greeted me with a bright but wary smile. People are always unsure how to treat the elderly. Like we might crumble if spoken too firmly. "Can I help you, ma'am?" "Yes," I said, sliding my ID across the counter. "I'd like to access my safety deposit box and review a trust account under Margaret Elwood." Her eyebrows rose just slightly. "One moment." She disappeared for several minutes, then returned with a clipboard and a set of keys. "Right this way, Ms. Elwood." Inside the vault, the air changed cooler still, like stepping into a space where time had been paused. She unlocked the small brass box. I reached in with both hands. Inside were papers meticulously filed, most yellowed at the edges, but still crisp. I pulled out a folded envelope. My husband's handwriting stared back at me. "In case I'm gone before the questions come." Beneath it, the original will. The one we never replaced, handwritten, notarized, binding. It granted me full authority over every account, every property, every investment until the day I died. And the trust account, still untouched, still bearing both our names, but mine listed. First, every deposit carefully cataloged, every note in the ledger matching what the bank now confirmed. I asked the clerk for a copy of the full statement. She printed it, sealed it in a cream envelope, and slid it across the desk. "Would you like help organizing anything else?" I smiled. "No, dear. I've organized enough in my lifetime. Now it's time to clarify." When I returned home, I moved with quiet efficiency. The house was silent, its walls unaware that change was underway. I went to the study, Daniel's space. Technically, but one I had once shared with my husband. Inside a locked drawer was the deed to the house. I found it years ago and kept it tucked under some of my sewing patterns. Daniel had never formally transferred ownership into his name. He likely assumed it was his by default. I opened the envelope again, this time reading the phrasing carefully. The name on the title was mine. Margaret Elwood, sole owner. All these years, he had made plans with a house that wasn't legally his. All this time. He thought I was holding on because I was weak. He never considered I might be waiting. I made copies of every document, deed, trust, records, the original will, and slipped them into a folder labeled M.E. Personal. I always liked the sound of my initials. Sharp, decisive, like a signature you don't apologize for. Then I picked up the phone. The lawyer's office was in the next town over, I had chosen her from the church bulletin board, someone fresh out of law school, eager to help the overlooked and overruled Dot. Her name was Naomi Talbot. She offered me tea the moment I walked in. I don't have much, I told her, sliding the envelope across her desk, but I have this. I want it protected. She took her time reviewing the papers, her lips moving slightly as she read. Her eyes widened at certain lines. This is comprehensive. She finally said, everything here gives you full control. I know. Has anyone tried to contest it? Not yet. But I suspect they think they won't need to. They assume I'll just fade. She nodded, then leaned forward. How can I help you, Miss Elwood? Want to restructure the trust? Remove my grandson as the beneficiary? Want to reallocate the funds into a charitable foundation in my name quietly? I want the house sold, but only after I've found a new place. And I want to make sure they can't touch a penny of it without my signature. Naomi's eyebrows raised, but her voice remained calm. Consider it done. Over the next 2 weeks, I worked quietly. I visited a cottage listed in the outskirts, a small, sun-warmed house with wild roses climbing the fence and a porch swing that creaked with age. It reminded me of the farm where I grew up. The realtor was kind and, more importantly, discreet. I bought the cottage in cash. I opened new accounts. I wrote a letter to a women's shelter I had once volunteered at, and included a preliminary donation from my future foundation. I transferred assets. I paid off the remainder of the property taxes on the house, and I drew up a new will. This time, not handwritten, but clear and impossible to contest. My lawyer notarized every copy. She even suggested a security firm to handle the safe transport of the safety deposit box contents to a new location. By the time Daniel, Rachel, and Lucas returned home, the house looked the same, but the ground beneath, it had shifted. They never noticed the new envelope. It's taped under my mattress, or the new keys in my handbag, or the quiet smile that had begun to bloom on my face each time I watched them pass me without a word. They thought I was still napping after lunch, still forgetting where I put my glasses, still counting on them. But I wasn't tired, I wasn't lost. I was preparing. They thought I wouldn't understand their plans. They thought their whispers would drift over my head like meaningless smoke. But I had heard everything, and I was no longer just listening. I was writing the ending, and for the first time in years, the pen was in my hand. The attic had always been my little chapel of dust and memory, a place where seasons sat in cardboard boxes and old griefs slumbered quietly under yellowed linens. That morning, the air up there was thick with summer heat and something else, something final. I stood at the base of the pull-down ladder, staring up into the dim space, and called out to Lucas through the open kitchen door. Could you help me bring down a few boxes? I asked, my voice carrying its usual polite tremble. He didn't look up from his phone. I'm late. Can it wait? No, I said gently. It can't. He rolled his eyes, muttered something under his breath, and left through the front door with a kind of disregard that used to shatter me. But not today. Today, I let it roll off like water on marble. I climbed the steps slowly, one careful hand gripping the railing, the other holding a flashlight. My knees ached, but I welcomed the pain. It reminded me I was still here, still choosing, still capable at the top. I opened the largest trunk, cedar-lined and layered with time. Inside were things no one else cared about. My father's pocket watch, still ticking softly like a heartbeat wrapped in brass. Letters from my husband, written during his deployment in '64, each signed forever. Will. The necklace I wore on our wedding day. The clasp still rusted from ocean air on our honeymoon. I gathered them with reverence, wrapping each in linen and placing them into my canvas bag. These were not just keepsakes. They were witnesses to who I'd been and who I was about to become again. I called the realtor that afternoon. Her name was Ellie, and she had the kind of voice that smiled even before her mouth did. I told her I was interested in selling the house quietly. No signage, no fuss. It's just a fair market evaluation and a fast close. Are you sure? She asked kindly. That house must mean something to you. It did, I said. But it doesn't anymore. And I'd like to do this quickly. She respected that. Within 2 days, she brought me 3 cash offers. I chose the one that came from a young couple with no children, but dreams of planting a garden. It felt right, fresh. Starts always feel right when they're earned. With the sale in motion, I turned my attention to something softer, something sweet, the cottage. I'd purchased 2 towns over, sat at the edge of a quiet cul-de-sac. White with green shutters, a worn rocking chair on the porch, and a rose bush that had climbed so wildly it curled around the mailbox like a secret. There was a library just a block away, and every Saturday, the farmer's market set up a booth selling honey and fresh thyme. I signed the final paperwork and visited the home once before move-in. I stood in the empty living room, listening to the creak of the floorboards, the hush of wind through the open windows. For the first time in years, I didn't feel watched. I didn't feel managed. I felt free. Back at the house, my old house. I baked one last pie, apple cinnamon, the crust pressed into the fluted dish I'd used every holiday since. 1973. It was the one recipe Lucas had loved as a child. He used to wait by the oven, nose pressed to the glass, asking if it was ready yet. I didn't bake it for him this time. I baked it for myself. A ritual of closure. Of remembering who I was before they reduced me to background noise. When the pie cooled, I placed it on the counter. Beside it, I left a folder. Plain, labeled only with his name. Lucas. Inside were the trust fund documents. Now voided this statement showing the empty account. And a handwritten letter sealed with the same wax stamp I used on our Christmas cards. You've pushed me once. I just stepped away this time. May you learn the cost of losing what was given in love. No anger, no vengeance, just truth. I walked out without saying goodbye. I left the key on the hook by the door, where I'd hung it every night for 28 years. I didn't take the furniture or the dishes or the heavy clocks that had watched me age. They belonged to that version of me. The one who stayed, the one who waited. I was not that woman anymore. I walked into my new life wearing my softest cardigan and carrying nothing but 2 bags, one with my past and one with my future. When I arrived at the cottage, the neighbor, a widower named Jack, waved from across the street and offered to help me bring things in. I declined gently. I can manage, I said, smiling, and I did. That evening, I brewed a pot of tea, sat on the porch, watched the sun dip behind the trees. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I didn't feel like I had to ask permission to exist. I had taken the quiet way out, but every step had echoed, and soon they would hear it. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the garden, wearing gloves too big for my fingers, trying to coax a stubborn row of marigolds into bloom. The air smelled like cut grass and sun-warmed soil. I had just finished tying back the roses when the phone buzzed in my apron pocket. Daniel, I let it ring. Then again, then a third time, persistent like always when it suited him. I wiped the sweat from my brow and stepped inside. My little cottage was cool, the curtains open, sunlight pooling gently across the hardwood floor. It felt nothing like the house I'd left behind. That house was heavy with assumption, thick with entitlement. This one breathed. I finally picked up on the 4th call. I didn't say hello, just listened. Daniel's voice was tight, clipped at the edges. Mom, where are you? I could hear Rachel in the background snapping. Ask her who has the deed and the key. The buyers are supposed to be here this weekend. I didn't answer. I walked to the front door, opened it, stepped onto the porch, and took a photo. Me. In my garden gloves, a soft smile on my face. Behind me, the roses in bloom, the new cottage door freshly painted pale yellow. Then I sent it, no words, just the image. Let them interpret it however they wished. Let them sit with the silence they had fed me for years. Later that evening, Naomi, My lawyer called to update me. They tried to access the trust account today, she said, half amused. Bank flagged it. They weren't happy. Did they get through? No, she replied. Everything is secure. The account is now entirely under your new foundation. Their names were removed the moment you signed. And I spoke to your son directly when he contacted my office, told him the documents are all binding. I smiled, though she couldn't see it. What did you tell him? Her voice didn't change. I told him you're not his burden, you're his benefactor. And that you've left, that's all. The next morning, I found a message from Lucas, a single line. Why would you do this? I stared at it for a while. My thumb hovered over the reply button, but I didn't tap it. I didn't need to. He knew why. He knew the moment I fell on those stairs. He knew the moment I stood at that barbecue. Unacknowledged, unwelcome. He knew when I was moved out of my own bedroom and into the margins of their lives. He knew. He just never thought I'd remember that week. I settled into a rhythm in my new life. I began waking with the sun again, not because I had chores to do, but because I wanted to watch the light climb over the trees. I made breakfast slowly, without rushing. I brewed tea in a porcelain cup with tiny violets painted on the rim. One I'd found at a thrift shop the week I moved in. Some afternoons, I sat under the maple tree in the backyard, rereading my husband's old letters. His words had aged better than most people I knew. Each one was like a lighthouse on a foggy night, steady, quiet, guiding me back to myself. Neighbors started waving more. A few brought cookies or zucchini from their gardens. One older woman, named Iris, invited me to join her knitting circle. I told her I might. I didn't tell them what I'd left behind, not because I was hiding, but because it didn't define me anymore. A few days later, I got a second message from Lucas. You were supposed to help me with college. I read it twice, laughed softly. Not bitter, just tired. I could have replied with a lecture, a reminder of all the help that came before, of the money we saved, of the sacrifices we made. I could have reminded him of the trust fund, untouched, until the day he chose to treat me like an obstacle instead of a grandmother. But instead, I wrote one sentence, then deleted it. Then I simply turned off the phone, went to water the garden. I had no interest in revenge. Not the way the movies show it, not loud, not violent, not destructive. Mine was quieter, measured, rooted in memory and self-respect. They thought I'd be angry, but I wasn't. Anger is a storm, loud, fast, gone by morning. What I felt was steadier, like the tide, like stone. I didn't want to punish them. I just wanted them to feel the space where I used to be, to notice the absence of my warmth, my loyalty, my presence, and to realize it had been a gift all along. In the days that followed, I received more messages. Daniel asking for explanations. Rachel asking for documents. Lucas asking for money. I answered, none. They didn't deserve my explanations. They didn't deserve my peace. What they deserved was silence, and silence, at last, was mine to give. It's been 2 years since I left that house behind, too quiet. Golden years where the air finally felt like mine to breathe. Every Thursday morning, I walked down to the community center with a canvas bag over my shoulder. Inside, notebooks, pens, and a tin of butter cookies no one eats, but everyone appreciates. I lead a small circle of women, older, like me, each carrying a story they were once told was too much. We call the class Writing Through Grief, but really, it's about writing through life. We sit in a circle, some in cardigans, others in old band tees, and we write. One woman, Hattie, lost her son to addiction. Margaret, a different one, was left alone in a hotel lobby after a routine surgery. Her daughter forgot to pick her up, and Lillian. She writes letters to a husband who hasn't spoken to her in 4 years, even though they still share a bed. We don't fix each other, we witness. We honor, we read aloud. And let the silence between paragraphs do its work. I tell them I'm not a teacher, just a woman who decided she wasn't done yet. My roses are blooming again. I tend to them in the mornings, fingers dusty with soil, knees padded by an old towel. There's something about the rhythm of pruning, of trusting things to return in their own time, that comforts me. A lesson, I suppose, in patience and quiet faith. There's a new trellis now, painted white. A gift from the neighbor across the street. His name is Jack. He brings me fresh eggs from his hens and pretends not to be lonely. I pretend not to notice. Some days we sit on my porch and listen to the world go by. No expectations, just breath and breeze and space to be. I still see Lucas's face sometimes in dreams, in strangers, but not with anger anymore. He is part of my story. Not the villain, not the hero, just the turning point. Sometimes it takes being pushed to understand where the edge really is. I used to believe that age made us invisible, but it just makes it easier for others to look past us and easier for us to stop needing their gaze. A few months ago, I received a letter from Daniel Short. Formal. Curious. He wanted to know if I was well, if I'd consider meeting for coffee, if I still thought about the past. I didn't reply, not because I'm bitter. I'm not. But because don't owe anyone the burden of my healing. Healing isn't something you give back once you've earned it. It's something you water, protect, let grow wild. If it needs to today in class. I asked the women to write about the thing that saved them. Their answers came slow and shaky at first. Forgiveness. One said, my dog. Another whispered, poetry leaving, coming back. When they asked me, I smiled. An empty room, I said. They looked at me, puzzled. I just nodded. Because sometimes the moment you're left alone is the first time you remember who you are. As the sun sets now, I sit in my favorite chair by the garden window. The sky is all lavender and flame. There's a pie cooling on the counter. No, one's coming for it, but I made it anyway. For me, because I've learned that quiet isn't the absence of life. It's the beginning of it. And I'm blooming here, not just in soil, but in soul. Some falls break bones, others break illusions. But sometimes they wake you up. And I am wide awake now, alive, free, finally seen.